I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into that beach house. The air felt too still, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I remember the faint smell of lemon cleaner mixed with old wood, and the distant sound of waves brushing against the shore outside the windows. But what I remember most clearly is the sound of my husband's voice floating down the narrow hallway, low, conspiratorial, a tone I had never heard from him in all our years together. I stopped walking. My sandals made a soft scrape against the tile, and I froze, afraid even the sound of my breathing might give me away. Michael was speaking Italian, a language he believed I didn't understand. He often underestimated me like that, brushing off my curiosity, dismissing the life I had lived before him. I suppose he thought he was safe speaking freely, but the truth was, I understood every single word. I leaned closer just enough to hear him clearly. "She won't question anything," he said quietly, almost laughing. "Elderly women like her believe whatever you tell them. Once the papers are signed, it's over." The words hit me like a slap. Elderly women like her. Like I was some clueless relic he could push around. And papers? What papers? My stomach tightened, and I felt this cold wave spreading through my chest. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. The Italian homeowner responded in a softer tone that I struggled to hear, but Michael answered him with a certainty that made my skin crawl. "She thinks I'm helping her. She doesn't know we've already arranged everything. Everything." I didn't move. My whole body felt rooted to the floor, even though my instincts screamed for me to run or shout or burst into the room and demand answers. Instead, I stood there breathing in slow, shaky breaths, trying to keep myself from falling apart. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure they would hear it. I kept telling myself maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm overreacting. You know how we do that, ladies, how we try to soften the blow before the truth crashes down on us. But deep down I already knew. I had known for a long time that something wasn't right. This moment just ripped the blindfold off completely. Then I heard my name. Not spoken with love. Not even with kindness. Just irritation. "She won't be a problem, trust me. Eleanor is too old to bother digging into details. And she doesn't speak a word of Italian." He laughed. He actually laughed. And something inside me cracked. I pressed my hand against the wall, steadying myself, because suddenly the whole room felt like it was swaying. I felt foolish. Foolish for trusting him. Foolish for ignoring the warnings my own heart had whispered for months. I thought about the nights he came home late, the phone calls he took outside, the documents he said were just routine. Had he been planning something all this time? Was this about the house? The money? Me? I wanted to burst into the room, to shout, "I understand every word you're saying." But another part of me, the quieter, wiser part, told me to wait, to breathe, to listen. My age doesn't make me weak. It makes me strategic. I stepped back slowly, pressing myself into the shadowed part of the hallway. My hands were trembling, but my mind began to clear. I needed to understand everything before I made a move. I needed to know exactly what he was planning and why. But standing there, listening to the man I shared my life with reduce me to a foolish old woman in front of a stranger, I felt something break inside me. Not a small crack. A fracture straight through the middle of my chest. Tell me something. Have you ever discovered a truth so painful, so unexpected, that for a moment you felt like you weren't even inside your own body? That's what it felt like for me in that hallway. Like my spirit stepped outside myself just to survive the moment. I took one slow breath, then another, trying not to crumble. And then, with my heart still pounding and my world collapsing around me, I whispered to myself, "Eleanor, hold on. Don't let them see you break." Because I needed answers. And I was going to get them. But to understand how I ended up in that hallway, listening to the man I trusted betray me in a language he thought I couldn't understand, I need to take you back to where all of this truly began. I suppose the best place to start is with who I was before everything began to crumble. My name is Eleanor Whitford, and when all of this happened, I was 72 years old. I had been widowed for almost a decade, long enough for the sharpness of grief to soften into something gentler, something almost companionable. I spent those years learning how to live alone again. Cooking for one, paying bills without asking anyone's opinion, waking up to a quiet house that felt too big and too empty most mornings. I had built a life that worked for me. Slow mornings with coffee and old jazz records. Long walks down by the water. calling my sister on Tuesdays just to gossip like teenagers. That routine wasn't exciting, but it was mine. And after losing my first husband, I thought I'd used up all the chaos life could throw at me. Then I met Michael. He arrived in my life the way spring arrives, suddenly and almost annoyingly cheerful. We met at a volunteer event at the library, of all places. He was charming, friendly, with that kind of smile that seemed to promise warmth. He laughed easily, asked questions about my life, remembered the answers. And after so many years alone, it felt nice, dangerously nice, to be seen again. First, things were simple. Dinners at quiet restaurants. Walks by the pier. Conversations that made me feel young again. Or at least not invisible. You know that feeling, don't you? When someone finally treats you like you're more than just an old woman in a world rushing past you. I didn't realize how much I missed being someone's priority until Michael made me feel like I was. We married after 2 years of dating. A small ceremony. Just a few friends, some laughter, and a happiness I truly believed would last. I never imagined that the man holding my hands that day would later use those same hands to sign documents that could destroy me. But of course, people rarely reveal the worst parts of themselves in the beginning. Looking back, I can see the first red flags now, bright as stop signs. But at the time, I brushed them away like dust on a mantle. The first strange thing happened just a few months after the wedding. I woke up early one morning and heard Michael on the phone. His voice was low, tense, not quite angry but cautious. When I walked into the kitchen, he quickly ended the call and forced a smile. "Just work things," he said. But Michael didn't have a job that required secretive phone calls at 6 in the morning. I remember laughing it off, telling myself not to snoop. That's what trust meant, right? Another time, I noticed him hovering around the desk in my study. I kept all my important documents there, insurance papers, bank statements, the deed to my house. I walked in and surprised him once, and he nearly dropped the folder he was holding. He said he was helping organize, which would have been sweet if I had ever asked for help, or if he had touched a single cleaning product since the wedding. Then there was the matter of his daughter, Emma. I tried, truly tried, to build a relationship with her. But she met every effort with thinly veiled irritation. She called me Eleanor instead of Dad's wife, never made eye contact for long, and always seemed to be sizing up my house like she was estimating the square footage. Michael brushed it off. "She just needs time," he'd say. But I could see something sharper behind her smiles, something calculating. One afternoon she came by unannounced. I found her in my living room, looking through framed photos on the bookshelf. She turned to me with a tight smile. "You've done well for yourself," she said. "Very comfortable life." It didn't sound like a compliment, but I told myself not to be paranoid. After all, I wanted so badly to believe that marrying Michael had brought me a family again, even if it came with some bumps in the road. The biggest red flag, the one I should never have ignored, happened a year later. I received a letter in the mail about a loan application under review. It had my name on it. I stared at it for a full minute before my brain even began to understand what I was reading. A loan? I hadn't applied for anything. I hadn't even financed a toaster since before Michael came along. When I confronted him, Michael waved it off like it was nothing. "Oh, that," he said, laughing. "Just a mistake with the bank. I'll take care of it." And I let him. Because I wanted to believe him. Because admitting something was wrong felt harder than pretending everything was fine. But slowly, almost gently, my sense of peace began to erode. I'd find him watching me in this strange way sometimes, like he was waiting for me to slip or forget something. He'd ask me where I put documents I hadn't even touched. He insisted on driving me everywhere, even when I wanted to go alone. He said he was being protective, but the word tasted wrong. Then came the day that set everything into motion. Michael suggested we take a little trip, just the two of us, to look at a beach house being rented by a foreign investor friend of his. He said it might be a lovely place for us to retire someday. And foolish me, I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe we were building something together. I didn't know then that the retirement plan he kept talking about wasn't for us. It was for him. When we arrived at that beach house, I remember feeling this odd sensation in my chest, like my instincts were tugging on my sleeve, telling me to pay attention. The owner greeted us kindly, speaking to Michael in Italian. I smiled and pretended not to understand, just as I'd always pretended around them. Michael had insisted for years that I didn't know the language. He had no idea that I had studied it in my 40s for fun, long before he ever entered my life. That day, the universe handed me the truth in a language he thought was safe. I can still see the moment clearly, the two of them standing by the window, sunlight hitting their faces, Michael speaking confidently about a future he had planned without me. Not beside me, around me. Against me. I didn't know it then, but that was the day my world split into two halves. The life I thought I had, and the truth that was waiting in the shadows. If you've ever ignored your instincts because loving someone felt easier than doubting them, you'll understand what I mean when I say this. The signs were there all along. I just wasn't ready to see them. I didn't sleep the night after we visited the beach house. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Michael's breathing beside me, wondering how long he had been rehearsing that false softness around me. His arm rested across my waist like it always did, heavy and familiar, and yet I felt like I was lying next to a stranger wearing my husband's skin. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again. Elderly women like her believe whatever you tell them. The words dug into me like thorns. By sunrise, I knew I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Something was happening, something bigger than one whispered conversation, and if I didn't start paying attention, I was going to lose everything before I even understood why. The morning began like any other. Michael made coffee and hummed while he read the news on his phone. He smiled at me like nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead. He asked if I slept well. "Oh, fine," I said. "Just a little restless." If he noticed how stiff my smile was, he didn't show it. Maybe he didn't care enough to look closely. He left around 10, saying he had errands. I watched from the window as he walked to his car, whistling. I waited until the engine faded down the street before I took my own steps into the part of my life I had never crossed into before. Investigating my own husband. It felt wrong. Even though everything inside me screamed that it was necessary. I kept thinking, what if I'm mistaken? What if I'm creating a monster out of the man I love? But instinct, that deep old woman instinct that we grow after decades of surviving this world, told me I wasn't wrong at all. I started with the simplest thing. I checked his desk. Michael never allowed me to organize his paperwork. He always said he had his own system, which in hindsight was ridiculous. He could barely organize the pantry. But I never questioned it. Marriage teaches you to pick your battles, and I picked the wrong ones. I let him guard his papers like a dragon sitting on a hoard, thinking it was just a little quirk. His desk drawer was locked. That wasn't new. What was new was the way my hand shook as I knelt down and searched for the spare key I had seen once, years ago, when he was out of town and asked me to mail a document. I found it taped under the drawer. And as soon as I opened that lock, the old version of me, the one who believed her husband was a good man, began to disappear. Inside were folders. Not many, but enough to earn my fear. One folder held receipts for hotel stays I didn't recognize, dated on days he claimed to be visiting his daughter. Another had a printed email exchange between him and someone named L. The messages were vague but unsettling. References to moving forward, finalizing arrangements, and she's calmer than expected. But the worst folder was the thin, crisp one with my name written on the cover. When I opened it, the first page nearly took the air from my lungs. It was a loan application with my name typed across the top, my social security number, my address, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It was a shaky imitation trying too hard to match my handwriting. My hands grew cold as I held the paper. I felt like the walls around me shifted, like the floor tilted. My own husband had tried to forge my signature, and badly at that. My first thought was denial. My second was grief. My third was anger so sharp it felt like metal. Why would he need a loan in my name? What debt was he hiding? What was he planning? I could have confronted him right then, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe wisdom. Confronting him without knowing the full truth would have been walking into a storm without shelter. If he had gone this far, who knew what else he had prepared? I closed the drawer, put everything back exactly as I found it, and placed the fake signature over my heart. I had to sit down because my knees were trembling. My eyes burned, not with tears at first, but with humiliation. I had married a man who smiled at me every morning while forging my name in secret. I decided to check the bank next. I had always trusted him to handle our shared finances, or rather, I let him convince me that he was better with numbers. The truth was I grew tired of arguing. But that morning I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account for the first time in months. My stomach twisted with each scrolling second. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize, translations of foreign transfers, payments to accounts with names I didn't know, and the balance in my savings account lower than it should have been. Much lower. The numbers blurred through my tears. How long had this been going on? I sat back in my chair and covered my face. I cried quietly, the kind of crying you do when the world is too heavy for your chest, but you can't let the grief spill out loudly. I cried for myself, for the foolishness of trusting too blindly, and for the realization that I had invited a threat into my home. When I finished crying, something changed in me. A slow burn began rising behind my ribs. I wasn't going to be the old woman he laughed about in that beach house. I wasn't going to let myself become another headline about a widow losing everything to a charming predator. I was going to find the truth, every last piece of it. The next step was his phone. Michael guarded his phone like a treasure chest. He kept it with him everywhere, even taking it to the bathroom. But that morning he forgot it on the nightstand. And I swear I stood over it like I stood at the edge of a cliff. I knew that whatever I found inside would change everything. His password was our wedding date. The irony stung. The messages were worse than I imagined. There were conversations with his daughter, long threads full of complaints about me, about my health, about my home, about everything that was mine before he ever walked into my life. One message from Emma made my hands shake so violently I had to sit. Did she sign anything yet? This is taking forever. And his reply. She will. She trusts me. And once we sell her house, everything else will fall in place. Stop worrying. Sell my house? My home, the home I paid for, the home I raised my children in, the home where I kept every memory of my first husband? No. No, I couldn't believe it. But the truth was staring at me from the glow of his screen. I felt sick. Betrayed. Violated. I kept scrolling. There were also messages in Italian to someone saved simply as Luca. Those messages were colder, more transactional. She's cooperative. She won't notice the missing funds. The paperwork will be ready by March. And the worst of all, once everything is finalized, I'm done. She'll understand. Done with what? Done with me? My breath froze in my chest. For a long moment I couldn't even think. I just stared at the phone, blinking slowly, feeling my world collapse one brick at a time. I set the phone down like it was a weapon. I knew I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. Something legal. Something I could take to someone who understood the law better than I did. Someone who would believe me, because by now I barely believed myself. That's when I went to see Daniel Price, our old family lawyer. I walked into his office that afternoon clutching a folder filled with copies I made of everything. Bank statements, fake signatures, printouts of texts. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the folder steady. "Eleanor?" he asked, eyes widening. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I need your help," I whispered. He closed the door behind me and motioned for me to sit. What happened? I laid everything in front of him, page by page. His expression grew darker with each document. When he reached the forged signature, he held it up to the light, his jaw tightening. "This is fraud," he said quietly. "This isn't just unethical. It's criminal." My throat closed. "So I'm not imagining it." "No," he said. "You're not." I felt both relieved and shattered. He asked question after question, and I answered everything, my voice breaking twice when I repeated Michael's words from the beach house. Daniel took notes, nodded slowly, and then leaned back in his chair with a deep sigh. "Eleanor, you need to be careful." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." We made a plan. Not a full one, just the beginning of one. He told me to keep collecting evidence. To act normal around Michael. To say nothing. To let him think I was still the naive wife who didn't understand the world he moved in. "Don't confront him yet," Daniel warned. "If he realizes you know what he's doing, he may accelerate things or hide evidence." I agreed, though the thought of pretending felt like sandpaper against my skin. When I returned home that evening, Michael greeted me at the door like always. He kissed my cheek. He asked if I wanted tea. He asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I looked at him, really looked at him, and everything inside me screamed. But I smiled. I smiled because I had to. because the game had begun. Over the next days I kept observing him. I watched how he grew jumpy whenever Emma called, how he shielded his phone whenever messages popped up, how he avoided eye contact when talking about money. One night, he left the house to grab dinner. Except he returned with no food and smelling of expensive cologne he didn't own. I didn't say a word. Another day, he took a call on the porch and spoke in Italian, assuming I couldn't hear him. But the window was cracked open, and the breeze carried every word to me. He told Luca that she's finally ready, and the papers will be signed soon. What papers? I needed to know. I found them 2 days later. He left his briefcase in the living room unzipped. Inside was a stack of documents clipped together. At the top was a title that made bile rise in my throat. Property Transfer Agreement. Owner, Eleanor Whitford. Beneficiary, Michael Whitford. He was trying to take ownership of my house. All of it. Not part of it. Not shared ownership. Everything. And the signature line was blank. Waiting. Waiting for my signature. Waiting for the moment he believed he had broken down my instincts enough to hand him my life on a silver platter. My hands went numb as I flipped through the pages. The legal language was heavy, suffocating, but the meaning was clear. Once I signed, he would own my home. Not us. Not jointly. Him. And once he owned it, he could sell it. Rent it. Transfer it. Drain my accounts. Leave me with nothing. My entire life savings, my home, my memories, he had plans for all of it. My eyes blurred as I read. I felt like I was drowning in a truth I didn't want to see. But I didn't cry this time. I didn't break. I didn't crumble. I folded the papers, placed them back exactly as I found them, and closed the briefcase. Because now I knew the scope of the betrayal. Now I had enough pieces to understand the picture. Now it was war. And the thing about women my age? We've survived enough battles to know how to win one quietly. That night, lying in bed beside Michael as he slept peacefully, as if he hadn't just tried to ruin me, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "You're not taking my life from me." And for the first time since everything began, I believed it. Have you ever reached a moment like that, when fear turns into purpose? When heartbreak sharpens into clarity? When the person you trusted becomes the enemy you must defeat? That was the night I stopped being afraid of what Michael might do, and started preparing for what I would do next. In the days that followed, I lived a double life. To Michael, I was still the quiet, aging wife who needed his guidance. To myself, I was something entirely different now, awake, sharp, alert. Every smile I gave him felt like holding a mask to my face, and every word I spoke had to be weighed, softened, controlled. He didn't know that I had seen the transfer papers. He didn't know I had copies of the forged documents. He didn't know I had spoken to Daniel Price. And he didn't know that every time he left the house, I moved through our home like a silent investigator piecing together a puzzle built from his lies. The tension between us didn't show on the surface. At least it couldn't. If Michael sensed even a flicker of suspicion, he would accelerate his plans. Men like him never wait once their control is threatened. They tighten their grip and pull harder. One morning, he came into the kitchen with a brightness that felt rehearsed. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "I made an appointment for us with the notary next week. Just a small thing. Routine stuff. Nothing big." Alarm shot up my spine, but I didn't let it show. "Oh," I said lightly. "What for?" "Oh, you know," he laughed, waving it off. "Just updating some ownership paperwork. Making sure our affairs are in order, that sort of thing." I stirred my tea slowly, keeping my hand steady even though my heart was racing. "You're very proactive lately." "Well," he said, squeezing my shoulder, "I like taking care of you. I want us to feel secure." Secure. He wanted himself to feel secure. Secure in the knowledge that I would lose everything without even realizing how it happened. "I trust you," I said softly. And God, saying those words nearly made me sick. But he smiled satisfied, already convinced that he still had total control. He had no idea the ground beneath him was shifting. After he left the house, I called Daniel and told him everything: the notary appointment, the date, the excuse Michael gave me. Daniel's voice was steady, but I could hear the urgency underneath. "He's trying to move fast now," Daniel warned. "But that's good for us. He's getting sloppy." "What should I do?" "Go along with it," he said. Do not refuse. Do not argue. We need him to think he has the upper hand. Meanwhile, I'll prepare what we need. What exactly do we need? He paused a moment. Protection. And leverage. The word leverage felt heavy, dangerous, but comforting. That afternoon, I went to the local print shop, making copies of every document I had collected. I stored them separately, one in a safe deposit box, one with Daniel, and one hidden in a place no one would ever think to look. Inside the old sewing machine my mother had given me. The machine didn't work anymore, but it was the kind of relic men never bothered to open. While I was out, I spotted Emma's car parked near the cafe across the street. She sat inside, sipping coffee while looking at her phone. My stomach dropped. Was she watching me? Had Michael sent her? Or was it just a coincidence? I walked past her car without turning my head. But in the reflection of a shop window, I saw her look up and follow my movement with her eyes. A slow knowing stare. I didn't let my pace change. I entered the bakery, bought 2 muffins I didn't even want, and stayed inside until she drove away. When I got home, Michael was already there, earlier than usual. He sat on the couch, his arms stretched along the backrest, trying to look relaxed, but something in his posture was too rigid. You were out longer than you said, he remarked. I stopped to get some muffins, I replied, setting the bag on the counter. Without telling me? His tone was light, but the question wasn't. I was worried. He had never been worried before. Now he was keeping track of my movements, watching the time. His desire for control had sharpened. I'm fine, I said, giving him a small smile. Just enjoying the weather. He stood up slowly, crossed the room, and brushed a hand over my cheek. It was supposed to feel tender. It didn't. You know, he murmured. These little changes in your routine, just let me know next time. We need to stay organized. I swallowed hard. Of course. He kissed my forehead, but I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt too much fear, disgust, anger simmering beneath my ribs. That night, he was unusually affectionate. He cooked dinner. He poured wine. He asked me about my day, about my sleep schedule, about whether I felt confused or overwhelmed lately. He was probing me, trying to see whether I was weakening mentally, trying to find an opening to justify pushing me to sign whatever he needed. At one point during dinner he said, You know, if anything ever happened to you, I want to make sure everything is easy for you, that everything is already set up. The implication burned my throat. Nothing is happening to me, I said. He smiled. Of course not. But planning ahead is important, especially at your age. At your age. 3 words that carried all his condescension, all his assumptions, all the justification he used to manipulate me. That night, lying beside him, I watched his chest rise and fall as he slept. His breathing was steady, soft. He looked harmless. It would have been so easy to believe it all was just paranoia. But the documents in my sewing machine told a different story. The next day I decided to go deeper. If Michael had forged my name once, he might have done it more than once. And if his daughter was involved, she might have left digital footprints too. I started by searching through our file cabinet, something he rarely touched. Most of it was mundane, old insurance papers, expired warranties, tax documents. But in a back folder marked Utilities, I found something strange. An electricity bill for a house I didn't recognize. A property in a neighboring town. I checked the name. It was mine. My name. My address, except it wasn't my house. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, and called the number on the bill, pretending to be confused. Hi, I'm calling because I received a bill for a property I don't own, I said. The woman on the phone typed for a moment. Ma'am, the service is under your name. Has been for 4 months. For months. Around the same time Michael started locking drawers. And the person who set up the service? I asked. Michael Whitford, she said. Authorized user. The room spun a little. My husband had opened a utility account in my name for a house I'd never even heard of. Thank you, I whispered, ending the call. I sat down slowly, my hands trembling. Why did he need a second property in my name? What was happening inside that house? I needed to see it. At 3:40 p.m. that day, after Michael claimed he had a meeting, I followed him. Not at first. I waited 5 minutes, then 10 before grabbing my keys and driving behind his car at a distance. He didn't go to a meeting. He went to the property. It was a small pale blue house on a quiet street. He pulled into the driveway, got out, and unlocked the door with a key he kept hidden from me. I parked around the corner out of sight. My heart felt like it was beating against the inside of my throat. What was he doing there? Was someone inside? Was this part of his plan? I waited. 20 minutes later, he came out holding a stack of envelopes and a cardboard box. He placed them in the trunk and drove away. And that was when I did something I knew was risky, reckless even. I approached the house. I looked around, ensuring no one was watching, and then I tried the front door. Locked, of course. But as I turned to leave, something glinted by the porch window. A small basement window, half covered by dirt. Unlocked. I knelt, lifted it carefully and squeezed myself through. My bones protested, but I made it. Inside it was dark and dusty. I stood slowly and looked around. The basement was empty except for an old water heater and a few crates. I climbed the wooden stairs quietly, emerging into the living room. The moment I stepped inside, my breath caught in my throat. There were binders everywhere, on the coffee table, on the kitchen counter, on the floor. Papers, forms, contracts. Some with my name. Some with Michael's. Some with Emma's. And some with names I didn't recognize. I picked up a binder labeled Plan B. Inside were pages and pages of instructions, timelines, financial transfers, real estate valuations. A handwritten note in Michael's messy script. Once signatures obtained, move Eleanor to assisted facility. Sell main property ASAP. I froze. Assisted facility. Not for recovery. Not for medical care. But as a way to remove me from my own life so he could take what he wanted without interference. I swallowed a sob, placing my hand on the table to steady myself. My knees felt weak. My vision blurred. Then something else caught my eye. A red folder with the title Contingency. Inside were printouts of emails between Michael, Emma, and Luca, discussing what to do if she becomes suspicious. My name was everywhere. My habits, my health records, my bank information. They had studied me like a target, not a wife. Like prey. In the margins of one email, Emma had written, "She's old. She'll give in. She always does." And Michael replied, "She trusts me too much to see the truth." I felt something deep inside me snap. A cold fury, clean and sharp. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A car door outside. I peeked through the blinds. It was Emma. My heart slammed against my ribs. I looked around, no good hiding spots. If she walked inside and saw me there, everything would crumble. Michael would know. Their plan would accelerate. I would lose. I acted on instinct. I crawled back to the basement stairs, hurried down, slipped through the window, and dropped onto the grass outside just as Emma unlocked the front door. I ran. Not fast enough for my age, but fast enough to get around the corner before she could see me. I reached my car, shut the door as quietly as possible, and forced my breathing to calm. My chest ached. My bloodstream felt like electricity. Then from inside the house I heard Emma laugh. A light, mocking laugh. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I would never see any of this. They were wrong. When I got home, Michael was waiting on the porch, arms crossed. "Where were you?" he asked, forcing a smile. I tried calling. "Oh," I said, shrugging lightly. "Just running errands." Without telling me again? I didn't think I needed permission. His eyes flashed with something sharp, something dangerous, before he forced a warm expression back onto his face. "Of course not," he said softly. "Just keep me informed, okay? I worry." I smiled back. "I know you do." But inside I was no longer afraid. I was furious. And fury, when held correctly, can become the strongest armor a woman can wear. That night, as I lay beside Michael listening to the gentle rhythm of his breathing, I whispered to myself the same words that had carried me through the worst moments of my life. "You survived before. You will survive again." But this time survival wasn't enough. I wanted justice. And I was going to take it. I woke up the next morning feeling strangely steady, as if a wire inside me had finally snapped into place. I wasn't terrified anymore. I wasn't confused or paralyzed. I was focused. Everything Michael and Emma thought they were hiding from me, I now saw clearly. Every word whispered in Italian, every forged document, every secret house. It all formed a map, and for the first time I could trace the route. The route led straight to a trap they were preparing for me. And now I was preparing one for them. Michael was already in the kitchen when I walked in, humming as he made coffee. He acted like everything was normal, but I noticed something new in his eyes: impatience. He was losing the illusion of control. He wanted things finalized. He wanted my signature. And that urgency was going to make him careless. He looked up when he heard me. "Morning, sweetheart," he said warmly. I was thinking, maybe after breakfast we could go over some paperwork. Just a few things I want to simplify for us. For us. The words tasted bitter. "Oh," I said, keeping my tone light. "What kind of paperwork?" "Oh, nothing stressful," he replied. "Just some routine estate planning. I've arranged everything. All you need to do is show up and sign a couple of pages." Easy. Easy for him. Catastrophic for me. He brought me a cup of coffee and sat across from me, watching my expression too closely. I sipped it slowly, pretending not to feel his eyes crawling across my face. "I want you to feel secure," he said softly. "I want our future to be safe." "Our future," I repeated. "That sounds nice." He smiled. And for the first time since all this began, I smiled back. Not a scared smile, not a polite one, but a deliberate smile. One meant to reassure him, lull him, keep him blind. The turning point began right there at that kitchen table with a smile that wasn't real. He relaxed instantly, which told me everything. He still believed he was winning. By mid-afternoon, he left the house to run a quick errand. I watched from the window as he drove off. The moment his car disappeared, I went to the hall closet and took out the old phone I kept for emergencies. The one Michael didn't know existed. I called Daniel. "It's happening," I told him. "He wants me to sign something today or tomorrow." Daniel inhaled sharply. "All right. Then we move immediately. Are you ready?" "I'm past ready," I said. He took a moment, then said, "You need to record everything from now on. Every conversation related to these documents. Legally, as long as one person knows about the recording, it's admissible." "That won't be a problem," I said. "He talks too much." We formed a plan for the next 40 minutes. Or rather, Daniel formed it and I added details no lawyer could know. Details about Michael's habits, his blind spots, the ways I could push him without making him suspicious. By the end of the call, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Not full control, not yet, but enough to start turning the tide. After the call, I went into the guest room where Michael kept a small safe. He thought I didn't know the code. He always entered it with his body blocking my view. But he underestimated mirrors. Specifically, the mirrored frame hanging across from the safe. I had watched his fingers many times when he thought I wasn't looking. I entered the code. The safe clicked open. Inside were what I expected: insurance documents, copies of his driver's license, birth certificate, but also what I feared: more papers with my name typed across the top. He had prepared multiple versions of the same transfer documents. Different dates. Different justifications. In one version I was requesting to transfer ownership due to health decline. In another I was granting him full financial authority for simplicity. And then there was an envelope. A thin beige envelope with my name written in his handwriting. My breath tightened as I opened it. Inside were photos. Not recent ones. Old ones. Me at moments of vulnerability. Me looking tired. Me sitting on the couch with my eyes closed. Me rubbing my temples during a migraine. All taken without my knowledge. He was collecting proof. Proof that I was declining. Proof he could use to justify decisions I never made. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed a hand against my chest, trying to steady my breathing. My own husband had been documenting me like a patient slipping into dementia. A knock on the front door jolted me. I froze. Another knock. I placed everything back exactly how I found it, closed the safe, smoothed my clothing, and quietly made my way to the hallway. When I opened the front door, I felt my stomach tighten. Emma stood there. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "Hi, Eleanor," she said brightly. "Thought I'd stop by." My pulse quickened, but I stepped aside. "Oh, that's unexpected. Come in." She walked inside like she owned the place, looking around, taking in the rooms, maybe checking whether anything looked moved. "Where's Dad?" she asked casually. "He stepped out." I'm not sure when he'll be back. Her smile widened just a bit. Perfect. She followed me into the kitchen. I made myself move slowly, naturally, like this was any normal visit. But everything in me was alert, analyzing her posture, her eyes, her tone. She leaned against the counter. So, Dad said you're signing some papers soon. That's great. I forced a light laugh. Oh, I don't know. I haven't seen anything yet. She tilted her head. You don't need to. Dad has everything organized. He's handling the hard stuff. Is he? Yes, she said, her voice hardening. He knows what's best for both of you. That was the moment I understood. Emma wasn't just helping him. She was pushing him. Maybe even the one who came up with the idea. She wanted the money. My home. My life. I pretended to look confused. Well, I trust him. She smiled in triumph. But inside I laughed. Because I had just gotten exactly what I needed. Her confirmation. Do you want some tea? I asked. Sure. I turned my back briefly, long enough to slip my phone into the apron pocket, recording. I could hear her footsteps shifting behind me, feel her impatience. So, she said, I just want to make sure you understand how important this is. These papers will protect Dad. And you. Protect me from what? I asked innocently. Oh, you know, she said lightly, waving a hand. Things that happen at your age. Memory problems, confusion, forgetfulness. It's better to sort out your affairs before things get complicated. I set her cup down a little harder than I intended. I'm not confused, I said quietly. She smiled tightly. Of course you're not. I didn't mean anything by it. But she did. When Michael came home an hour later and saw Emma's car outside, he looked startled, then irritated, then nervous. They spoke in the living room while I cleaned the kitchen. Their voices were low, but not low enough. She's ready, Emma whispered. Just push a little. She's not exactly ready, he whispered back. Then make her. It took everything in me not to slam a plate on the counter. That night after Emma left, Michael approached me while I was folding laundry. Sweetheart, he said gently, I think tomorrow would be a good day to visit the notary, just to take care of that paperwork we talked about. Make things easier. I looked at him for a long moment, studying him like he'd been studying me. What if I want to look at the papers first? I asked. His smile faltered for a split second, barely noticeable, but after everything I'd learned I saw it. Oh, there's no need, he said. It's all very straightforward. I wouldn't let anything hurt you. He took my hand and squeezed it. His thumb stroked mine in a gesture meant to soothe, but his palm was sweating. That was when I realized. He was afraid. Not of losing control yet, but of losing time. The illusion was cracking. A hairline fracture. But a fracture all the same. I decided to widen it. All right, I said softly. We can go tomorrow. His relief was instant. But my decision wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Because now that he believed I would sign, tomorrow I would change everything. When Michael went to bed early, exhausted from a day of anxious plotting, I stayed awake at the kitchen table, sipping tea and watching the moonlight spread across the floor. For the first time I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not grief. Power. The turning point wasn't one moment. It was all of them together. Catching Emma's confession. Finding the photos. Opening the safe. Hearing Michael's desperation. The balance had changed. Michael just didn't know it yet. I leaned back in my chair and whispered into the quiet room. You're not taking my life. I'm taking mine back. Tomorrow would decide everything. I woke up before sunrise on the day everything would break open. It felt like the air in the house was holding its breath. Even the floorboards seemed quieter under my feet as I walked toward the kitchen. Michael was already there, wearing a clean shirt and that salesman's smile he always used when he wanted something. Morning, he said cheerfully. Big day. It took everything in me not to flinch. Oh yes, I said softly. Very important. He poured coffee for both of us, but I barely touched mine. I kept replaying the plan in my mind. Every step, every sentence, every moment I needed to capture. My little emergency phone was hidden in my purse, already recording. Daniel would meet us at the notary as if by accident. The documents would expose themselves. And Michael would finally face truth without a mask to hide behind. But he didn't know any of that. On the drive there, he hummed along to the radio. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. At one point he glanced over at me and said, "You know, sweetheart, you're doing the right thing. You really are. This will make everything easier." "For who?" I asked quietly. "For both of us," he said quickly. Too quickly. "You'll see." I looked out the window instead of responding. The morning sun cast long shadows across the street, and everything felt strangely fragile, like the world was a thin sheet of glass and we were driving across it without realizing how easily it could crack. When we arrived at the notary office, Michael squeezed my hand as if we were a loving couple walking into something normal, simple, routine. But as soon as we stepped into the lobby, a familiar voice called out, "Eleanor." Michael froze. Daniel stood near the reception desk, holding a folder. Perfectly timed. Calm. Professional. Exactly as he needed to be. "Oh," Daniel said, smiling as though pleasantly surprised. "Michael." "Eleanor. I didn't expect to see you here today." Michael's fingers tightened around my hand. "Daniel," he said with a strained smile. "What a coincidence." "A coincidence," Daniel repeated lightly. "Yes. What are you two here for?" "Just some paperwork," Michael said quickly. "Routine stuff." Daniel looked at me, and I saw the smallest flicker of reassurance in his eyes. "Well," Daniel said, closing his folder, "I'm here for a consultation myself. Maybe afterward I can offer you both a ride home. Would be lovely to catch up." Michael forced a laugh. "We're fine, thanks." But I smiled and said, "Actually, that sounds wonderful, Daniel. Thank you." Michael shot me a sharp look, the kind that carried warning beneath warmth. But he couldn't protest without seeming controlling in front of a lawyer. So he swallowed his irritation and guided me toward the notary's office. Inside the notary, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes greeted us politely. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitford? Please come in." Michael placed a thick folder on her desk. "Yes. We just need to finalize a transfer of property. My wife is simplifying some ownership documents." The notary nodded and began opening the folder. It was the moment everything pivoted. She froze, then frowned. "Mrs. Whitford," she said slowly, "do you realize that this document transfers full ownership of your home to your husband?" Michael laughed too loudly. Yes, we've discussed it. It's perfectly fine." The notary turned to me, concern flickering in her eyes. "Is that correct? You want to give complete ownership to your husband?" I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "Michael," I said softly, "why don't you explain it to her? So she knows exactly what I'm signing." His jaw twitched. "Oh, sweetheart," he said with a tight smile. "She doesn't need the whole story. It's just easier for us legally." "Explain it," I repeated. The notary looked between us, sensing tension. She pulled out the next page. "And here, it states that all financial authority will be transferred to your husband as well. Your accounts. Your assets." Michael lunged lightly forward. "Just formality." "No," the notary said firmly. "This is not a formality." Silence. Then I said clearly, "Michael, please tell her why you've prepared these papers." He looked at me like he was trying to figure out if I was still under his thumb. "Eleanor," he said gently, too gently, "you're tired. This is just confusing for you. Let me." And that was when Daniel walked into the room. The notary blinked. "Sir, I'm afraid. I'm here as Mrs. Whitford's legal representative," Daniel said smoothly, flashing his card. "She asked to consult me about these documents." Michael's face drained of color. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Eleanor, what is this? What did you do?" I ignored him and turned to the notary. "Please continue reading." She hesitated only a moment before proceeding. "This clause," she said slowly, "states that if any mental decline is observed, your husband has the right to make medical and residence decisions for you, without your approval." "Again," Michael snapped. "A precaution." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Interesting precaution for a woman with no medical issues." Michael opened his mouth, but I cut in. "Would you like to tell them about the second house, Michael?" He blinked. "What?" "The house where you kept binders labeled Plan B and Contingency. The one with photos of me sleeping." and emails with Emma discussing my decline. His mouth dropped open. Daniel calmly placed copies of the documents on the notary's desk. "These are forgery attempts," he said flatly. "The signature on the financial forms is not Eleanor's handwriting. I have handwriting analysis underway." The notary stiffened. "Forgery? In my office?" Michael's voice cracked. I don't know what she's talking about. This is insane." "She's confused." "Confused," I said quietly. "Play the recording." Daniel pressed a button on his phone. Michael's voice filled the room. "She trusts me too much to see the truth. Once she signs, everything else will fall in place." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Michael's entire body went rigid. His denial crumbled. "Eleanor," he whispered, "you set me up." I met his eyes. "No. You set yourself up." His control snapped. "You stupid old." "Mr. Whitford," the notary said sharply, standing from her desk, "I'm calling the police." "No," he shouted, but it was too late. She had already dialed. Michael grabbed the documents, flipped the desk and bolted out the door. The notary gasped. Daniel ran after him. People in the lobby screamed as Michael shoved past them. But I didn't move. I simply sat there, hands folded, breathing slowly. Because the moment he fled, I won. Daniel returned a minute later. He ran. "Police are on their way. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, standing. "Please take me home." Outside, the world felt colder. The sun brighter. My heart heavier than I expected. Because as much as I knew Michael didn't love me, a small part of me had still hoped I was wrong. The drive home was silent. Daniel kept glancing at me, as if afraid I might collapse. I didn't. I couldn't afford to. When he pulled into my driveway, he said, "Eleanor, don't go inside alone. We don't know where he." "I'll be fine," I said quietly. "I need to finish this myself." He hesitated. "I'll wait in the car." That I allowed. I stepped out and walked toward the house. The air felt heavy, thick, wrong. I unlocked the door slowly. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. "Michael," called softly. No response. I walked toward the living room, spotting something strange. An overturned lamp, a picture frame shattered on the floor. Then I heard breathing. Heavy breathing. And when I turned, he was standing by the hallway, hair disheveled, face red, eyes wild. "There she is," he said softly. Too softly. "My smart little wife." Fear crawled up my spine, but I kept my voice steady. "You need to leave." "Oh, do I?" he said, stepping forward. "Michael," I said firmly. "The police are coming." He laughed. A horrible, broken laugh. "You ruined everything. Everything I was building for us." "For you," I corrected. He slammed his fist against the wall. "You pushed me to this. You and your selfishness. Your money. Your house. You think you deserve all that? At your age." I held his stare. "I earned everything I have. You tried to steal it." He took another step. "If you had just signed, none of this would have happened. And if you had loved me," I whispered, "none of this would have been necessary." He froze. For the first time, I saw something like real emotion in his eyes. Not regret, not guilt, but anger mixed with humiliation. "You think you're so smart," he said. "So independent." I didn't move. He reached for me. And that was when I said, "Michael, everything you're doing right now is being recorded." His hand stopped midair. He looked at my purse, at the bulge where the emergency phone was running, and his face changed. "You bitch," he whispered. But he didn't touch me. Not because he didn't want to, but because he knew he couldn't. We stood there frozen in the hallway, the seconds stretching thin. Then in the distance, the faint sound of police sirens began to echo. He turned toward the door. "No," he muttered. "No, no, no." I stepped aside, letting him go. Because in that moment I knew something with absolute certainty. Michael wasn't chasing freedom. He was running from the truth. He bolted out the door. Daniel rushed toward me. "Where is he?" "Running," I said softly. The police cars turned onto my street seconds later. Officers jumped out, shouting commands, and in less than a minute, Michael was on the ground, hands behind his back, screaming that I had betrayed him. I watched from the porch, wrapped in a blanket Daniel placed around my shoulders. As they put him in the car, our eyes met one last time. His were filled with hate, mine with overwhelming, shaking relief. When the police drove away, Daniel looked at me carefully. "Eleanor, it's over. You're safe." But I shook my head. "No," I whispered. "It's not over." Because Emma was still out there. And she wasn't finished. The house felt impossibly quiet after the police took Michael away. A strange, eerie quiet, the kind that settles over a place after a storm tears through it. Daniel stayed with me for a little while, making sure I drank water, making sure I sat down, making sure I breathed. But as soon as I insisted I was okay, he left. He knew I needed the silence. I needed the space to let the truth land inside me. When the door closed behind him, I walked through the room slowly. The hallway where Michael had stood raging was still vibrating with the memory of his voice. The kitchen smelled like stale coffee. The living room still had shattered glass on the floor from the picture frame he knocked over. But the deeper I moved into the house, the more a strange realization washed over me. For the first time in a very long time, the space was mine again. It took hours before the tension left my muscles. Hours before my hands stopped shaking. I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind outside, waiting for my heart to catch up with the reality that I was safe. But safety wasn't the same as peace. Peace came slowly. 2 days later, I met with the police and gave my statement. They showed me the evidence they recovered from the second house. Files, emails, timelines, even an empty envelope addressed to an assisted living facility. They asked if I recognized the handwriting. I said yes, but I didn't look at it long. I wasn't ready to see any more of the man Michael had become. He had always hidden those parts of himself from me. Or maybe I had hidden the truth from myself. That was the cruel thing about betrayal. You don't just lose the person. You lose the story you told yourself about your life. I learned that Michael wasn't just being charged with fraud. The attempted transfer of my property, the forged signature, the financial exploitation. All of it formed a web of crimes more serious than I had realized. And behind all of it, Emma's fingerprints were everywhere. She didn't show up after his arrest. Not once. Not at my door. Not at the police station. She simply vanished. But the silence was a message on its own. She had never cared about her father. She cared about my house, my accounts, my life. That kind of greed doesn't disappear. It hides. It waits. It plots. The detective assured me that Emma would face consequences too. But I knew better. People like her didn't walk into justice easily. They slipped around it. They wriggled through cracks and shadows. Still, something had shifted. I wasn't the woman she believed she could bully. Not anymore. A week passed before I stepped into my garden again. The air smelled like wet earth and eucalyptus. I crouched beside my rose bushes, trimming dead petals, letting the quiet settle into my bones. The world kept moving even when our lives cracked apart. Grass grew. Birds sang. Roses opened. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the line was silent for a moment. Then a voice said, sharp and icy, "You ruined everything." "Emma." I didn't flinch. "No," I said softly. "I saved myself." "You think this is over," she spat. "My father loved you." "That wasn't love," I said, feeling my chest tighten. Not with fear, but with clarity. Whatever he felt, whatever he told you, it wasn't love. Not for me. And not for you. She inhaled sharply. "You'll regret this." "No," I said quietly. "You will." I hung up. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, and for the first time since everything began, I felt something warm spreading through me, strength. Not the kind that roars or fights, but the kind that whispers, "You lived through this. You're still here." Days passed. Then weeks. I met with my attorney. We secured my accounts. We filed every protection order possible. I changed locks. I installed cameras. Not because I was afraid, but because I was prepared. One afternoon, Daniel came by with a stack of papers. "It's official," he said, smiling gently. "Your home, your finances, your assets. Everything is secure. No one can touch a thing without your consent." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you." "You did the hard part, Eleanor," he said. "You fought. Most people in your position don't." I didn't know what to say to that. Because the truth was, I hadn't fought because I was brave. I had fought because I had to. Because survival becomes instinct when you've lived long enough to lose what matters. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of chamomile tea and listened to the distant waves. The same waves that had whispered through the windows of that beach house where I overheard everything. Felt like a lifetime ago. Like a story that had happened to a different woman. I took a sip of tea and said quietly to myself, "You're safe now." But part of me wondered if I would ever feel truly safe again. When someone you love betrays you so deeply, the world rearranges itself. Walls become thinner. Shadows become thicker. Trust becomes something fragile, something that feels both necessary and dangerous. And yet, the house was quiet. My heartbeat was steady. My breath was calm. I realized something. Peace wasn't the absence of fear. Peace was learning to hold fear in one hand and strength in the other, and choosing strength every time. A month later, I finally returned to the beach house. The foreign owner had invited me back, apologizing for everything. I walked through the room slowly, touching the walls, listening to the soft echo of the ocean outside. At one point, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Because if I hadn't been there that day, if I hadn't heard what Michael said in Italian, if I hadn't pretended I didn't understand, I might have lost everything. What a strange thing to realize your life was saved by a lie someone believed about you. When I left the beach house, the sun was setting. The sky glowed shades of gold and rose, and for the first time in months, I felt the warmth reach all the way inside my chest. I drove home slowly, windows down, air cool on my face. And when I reached my driveway, I saw something that nearly brought tears to my eyes. A single white envelope on my porch. No handwriting. No name. My breath caught. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A photo. Emma standing beside the pale blue house. The second house. Smiling. No message. No threat written down. But everything in that picture was a message. I stared at it for a long moment, then walked inside, closing the door behind me. Fear didn't spike this time. Resolve did. I placed the photo in a drawer, locked it, and whispered, "I survived your father. I will survive you." And for the first time I knew it was true. The storm was not fully over. But I was no longer afraid of the rain.